Big news today in the ongoing collapse of the Chinese real estate market. Country Garden, one of the biggest developers in the world, has just announced that they are going to miss the deadline for filing their annual report and that they expect trading in their shares to be suspended in Hong Kong when that market reopens on April 2nd. And when you hear about financial reports being delayed or regulatory deadlines being missed, it almost always means the same thing: fraud. What's up, guys? I'm nobody special, and for the better part of 2.5 years, I've been documenting the ongoing collapse of the Chinese housing market that started in 2021 with the collapse of Evergrande, and it still continues to this day, seemingly getting worse day in and day out. And all the while, a lot of people have been saying, well, Evergrande is an isolated case, and yeah, there's these other developers, but at the very least, Country Garden is in good shape. And Country Garden has been held up as this example of better performing and more responsible companies. That is until today when we got this one in Bloomberg. Country Garden delays results and expects a trading suspension. Country Garden Holdings, one of China's biggest property developers, warned it will miss a deadline for reporting annual results, further complicating plans to restructure its debt following a default last year. In a surprise announcement late Thursday, the Foshan-based developer said it expects to delay publishing its 2023 results beyond a March 31st deadline imposed by regulators. The delay will likely result in a suspension of trading on April 2nd when the Hong Kong market reopens after Easter, the firm said in a filing. Country Garden said it needs time to collect more information so it can make appropriate accounting estimates and judgments and reasonably reflect changes in the industry, according to the filing. And this is important here. Country Garden's auditor is Price Waterhouse Coopers, whose China affiliate audited China Evergrande Group's main onshore unit, which was accused this month of overstating revenue by about $78 billion over 2 years, which would make it the biggest accounting fraud in history. Country Garden said it will continue to work closely with Price Waterhouse Coopers to publish the 2023 annual results. Now, for those who haven't been following the collapse of the Chinese housing market, a quick review of history. It all started in 2021 when China Evergrande, the third largest developer in China, started to have problems, and they would eventually default on some of their offshore dollar-denominated debt in December of 2021. That triggered cross-default provisions in those bonds. Basically, when Evergrande defaulted on one bond, they defaulted on all of them. And so began a cascade of defaults that would see over 50 Chinese developers default on their bonds, and that would also kick off a series of legal disputes that are still dragging out in court to this date. Then in October of last year, Country Garden would default on one of their offshore bonds, also triggering cross-default provisions. This was after years of China housing bulls pointing to Country Garden as an example of why the collapse of the Chinese housing market wasn't that bad. Then on January 29th of this year, a Hong Kong judge ordered China Evergrande Group to go into liquidation, basically sell all your assets and pay back the people you owe money to as much as you can, and then you're going out of business. Although it still remains to be seen if the Chinese government will enforce that Hong Kong court ruling, Evergrande is yet to put those assets up for sale. And just a month later, Country Garden would be hauled into that same Hong Kong court as their bondholders filed a liquidation petition trying to get the same result, requesting that Country Garden be ordered to sell their assets and pay back the people they owe money to. Then just last week, we got the not-so-shocking revelation that Evergrande has been accused of a $78 billion accounting fraud, as Chinese officials have accused the company of overstating their 2019 and 2020 earnings by a combined $78 billion. That would make Evergrande the largest accounting scandal in history, dwarfing even the likes of Enron, Luckin Coffee, and WorldCom. Now, this cast a spotlight on Evergrande's auditor, Price Waterhouse Coopers, a U.S.-based firm and one of the big four accounting firms, because it was a subsidiary of Price Waterhouse Coopers who signed off on those fraudulent books for Evergrande. And in a testament to just how sharp the viewers on this channel are, on Friday in my live stream when I was covering this accounting fraud at Evergrande, I got this question from Raiden57 wondering who is the auditor for Country Garden. And it turns out the auditor for Country Garden is that same firm, Price Waterhouse Coopers, and that was one fine bit of foreshadowing by Raiden57 there, because we find out just a few days later that Country Garden is delaying their annual report. And whenever you hear about that, that usually means that the auditors have found something in the books that stinks and that they're not signing off on it. And well, Price Waterhouse Coopers is in face-saving mode here because they signed off on some of the most fraudulent books in history, which means they're doing extent of condition reviews right now, going back over everything they've signed off on in the last few years. And there's a good chance they found something at Country Garden that also stinks. And again, when you hear about financial reporting deadlines being missed or annual reports being delayed, it almost always means something bad for that company. You may recall it was just a few weeks ago that New York Community Bank delayed their annual report. And when it was filed 2 weeks after the deadline, we found out that their most recent quarterly loss was actually 10 times worse than they had previously reported, and that they had uncovered material weaknesses in the risk controls at that bank. So besides a wave of defaults, now we've got a second major Chinese developer with some major accounting issues going on, and both are associated with Price Waterhouse Coopers, a Big Four accounting firm. So this leaves investors, creditors, customers, and bankers all wondering what they can't see. And when people start wondering about things that they can't see or what might be lurking beneath the surface, they tend to get very defensive. And that causes things like liquidity to dry up as banks are no longer willing to accept certain collateral or make loans to certain institutions. And of course, any other Chinese developer that's been audited and signed off on this Chinese subsidiary of Price Waterhouse Coopers, their books are now going to be suspect. So this is the kind of thing that can cause big problems in the Chinese debt market. And they're already having big enough problems. They've got 50 developers have defaulted. They're still trying to figure out what to do with Evergrande. Meanwhile, the Chinese government is trying to organize a rescue of Banca, yet another Chinese developer that's having problems. So long story short, the bottom is still not in the Chinese housing market. Problems are still getting worse. Now we've gone from defaults and debt to fraud and accounting issues. And something tells me that before this thing is over, there's going to be a lot of people in handcuffs. Till next time, live small and dream big.